All right. I want to welcome everyone to So You Want to Start a Nonprofit. We have one of our nonprofit mentors with us today, Ramesh Advani. He is one of a handful of nonprofit mentors that we have. So certainly something to keep in mind should you have questions after this presentation and would like to meet one-on-one with one of our nonprofit mentors. So just to get things rolling, if you are new to SCORE, I want to make sure you understand what we do and how we can help you with your business or nonprofit. We share information in a couple different ways. One is through our website, which score.org has a lot of great information, templates to download, articles to read, blogs, videos to watch. It's a really great resource for a lot of information. The other way we share information is through our workshops and webinars. Those are advertised through our newsletter, our social media outlets, through the SBA website, and a couple other partner areas, but definitely watch for that newsletter. We're sending out several a week to make sure that you know all the events that are coming up. I think the most important way that we share information, though, is through our mentoring. And our mentors are volunteers, and they come to us with lots of different experiences and backgrounds to help the small business community. And we're working with folks at all stages of the game, whether you're trying to decide if starting a nonprofit's right for you or starting a small business is right for you, to the planning stage, to the already in business or operational phases. Folks come to us with many different questions that we can match them to help them through the process. A beginning session will probably last around 40 minutes. The mentor's going to want to know about you, what your goals are, what your challenges are, and they're going to help you put together a plan. And the other wonderful thing is that our mentors work as a team. So you're not just meeting with one person, you're meeting with the team. They're in the, maybe sometimes it's just they're in the background and they're, your mentor went back and got more information to expand on a certain topic, or they'll invite someone for the next follow-up session, etc. It's a wonderful experience, I think, for both our volunteers and for our clients. So if you don't have a mentor and you'd like one, it's very easy to do. The score.org website, there's a blue box, put in your zip code, and that will match you to the chapter nearest you. And then they'll ask a couple questions, and that information will be used to match you to the proper mentor. So we are recording today, and I will post that recording. It'll be about 24 to 48 hours, and it'll be at the score.org/Boston website. Under the local workshops tab previously recorded, you can see from the graphic, it's the blue bar where you can find that page to find all the workshop recordings that we have available to people. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull this down, and we do have a nice group of people today, so we are going to go ahead and use that QA tab on the Zoom bar. So if you have a question for Ramesh today, if you could put it in there, and everything else can go into chat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Ramesh. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. And hello, everybody. So nice you could join us. This is not going to be a heavy lift. And I hope if you have questions, if you just put it in the box that Teresa mentioned. And what I will do is from time to time, I will ask Teresa to tell me if there are any questions, and I'll answer them. And hopefully you'll be able to also look at after it's recorded later on if you have more questions. And then after the webinar, if, as Teresa said, you want to, set up a meeting either with me or another one of my colleagues, other mentors, I would be happy to, you could just reach out to Teresa and you could set up time, and I'd be happy to do that. So let me get started. What this webinar is for you to think about certain questions and have some thoughts clear before you get started. And that's the purpose. It's not specifically to give you, responses or solutions to your specific area of the nonprofit industry or where you want to be. And so let me go down to the next slide. All right. So we're going to start off with what is a nonprofit. It may seem obvious, but I thought I'd go over some specifics. How is a nonprofit different, and how is it the same as a for-profit? What are some of the absolute musts you should think about when you're forming a nonprofit? And I'm going to talk about some key roles. And probably one of the most important things that I'm sure it's on your mind as you're thinking about this is money. And for the nonprofit, fundraising, what's involved with that, and what is your role. Talk a little bit about competition and collaboration, and your strengths and gaps. So that's the general flow of the meeting. Sorry, we used to do, I probably shouldn't, I should remove the slide. We used to do this workshop in person, but you could just do this for yourself as a little exercise. Write down what you think is relevant for yourself. What's in your background that's driven you to forming a nonprofit, or personal skills or background that you have. And also write down what you hope to get out of this webinar. And again, you can reflect on this on your own. You don't have to share it. We've got a pretty good size group of people on the webinar, so it would be hard to sort of open it up and just have everybody share everything. So first, let me start off with what is a nonprofit. So a typical acronym is NPO. A nonprofit is a non-business entity, and it's an organization or an institution which is a legal entity that is organized and operated for a collective, public, or social benefit. And that's the official definition of a nonprofit, at least from the standpoint of also the industry and the IRS. So a nonprofit is subject to the non-distribution constraint. And what is the non-distribution constraint? What that means is whatever revenues come to the nonprofit, whatever money is coming in, any expenses are taken out of those revenues, and whatever is left over cannot be distributed to anybody who is an owner or the founder or anything like that. All of those funds must be committed to the organization's purpose and cannot be taken by any private parties. So if you as an individual are forming a nonprofit, the nonprofit is a separate entity from you. You are the private party. So hope that's clear. It's a pretty obvious definition, but you should know how this is looked upon by the marketplace. So what is different and what's same between a for-profit and a not-for-profit? A for-profit entity is one that operates as a business aiming to generate a profit for its owners. Of course, it's also aiming to meet the mission and the objectives of why the organization or the company is in existence. So Google or Microsoft, they have certain purposes to achieve in terms of the delivery to the marketplace and to its customers. But one big part of the existence is to generate profit. And a for-profit entity, before it can distribute the profits to the owners, it has to pay its taxes and then take what's left over after the taxes. They can either reinvest the excess and grow the company, or they can distribute it to the owners. And publicly traded for profits, the distribution of profits, portions of it, that's called dividends. A nonprofit is different. They pay no taxes. A nonprofit organization does not, when anything that is left over, as I said in the previous slide, the constraint is they have to reinvest all that money back into the nonprofit. The next point is pretty significant. No one owns a nonprofit. As you know, a for-profit is owned by the shareholders of the for-profit, whereas a nonprofit is not owned by anybody. The other big difference, even though nobody owns it, the nonprofit can raise public funds from anyone and everyone. And because of that, it's a public charity, and they must be accountable and they must be very transparent in how those funds get used. And transparency means relative to the expenses. What is the money being spent on, where, and keeping track of it, keeping all the expense receipts, etc. So those are the differences between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. What's the same between a for-profit and a not-for-profit organization? The first one, which is an absolute given, a nonprofit is also a business. It's sort of odd to use that term, but a nonprofit must make enough money to not only accomplish the mission, but also make enough money to stay in business year after year. And what do I mean by that? So if a nonprofit is formed and carries out certain activities to meet its mission, it has to have more money coming in, whether it is through grants or through what they might charge, even if it is at cost for the services they provide. They have to bring in more money than the total expenses in a year, because one year after another is not the same. In a given year, they might be able to raise a certain amount of money as grants, and in the next year, they might not raise enough. So they need to have money in the bank in savings so they can cover all the expenses year after year. They also need to make more money so they can expand the scope of the nonprofit, and go beyond the physical reach of the clients that they reach at any point in time. So that's the same, just like a for-profit needs to think about expanding and growing, so does a nonprofit. The other thing which is the same is a nonprofit also faces competition, just like a for-profit. And what does that mean? You might say, what do you mean nonprofits compete against each other? Oh, they sure do. They compete in two areas. One is there are other nonprofits who are providing the same services. So people have a choice of going to you for your nonprofit or going to the other nonprofit. The other area of competition is you are going to do fundraising. You're going to go to foundations. You're going to apply for grants. While you're not alone in applying for grants, the grantor can choose between who they support in terms of the grants they give, who makes a better case for themselves. So just like a for-profit has competition, so does a nonprofit. So I'll stop here for a second and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, can you explain what the difference between a low profit or a hybrid LLC is with a nonprofit?
So, those are interesting words, a hybrid or a low profit. It's still a for-profit, whether it's low or it's an LLC. A nonprofit can also, many people form a nonprofit as an LLC, but they don't make a profit on that. Does that answer the question of the person who asked that?
Certainly she can ask for clarification. So you're saying a low profit LLC is still a for-profit business. It just has a
low profit.
yeah, a low profit or a commitment to the community, but it doesn't have the benefits of a nonprofit. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's clear. And it's certainly, Patricia, if there's anything else we can add to that, let us know.
Okay. So let me get to the next slide, which is, okay, let's say you know the difference between a for-profit and not-for-profit. What are the things you should keep in mind at a very high level, 100,000-foot level? There are four points that I'm making here. The first one, which I've made before, you have to be very transparent and you must meet all state and federal requirements of reporting and filing. The federal requirements are the same regardless of which state you're in. The state requirements most likely are the same from one state to another, but wherever you are registered as a nonprofit, you have to make sure you follow the requirements of that state. So if you are in Massachusetts, you have to follow Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, you follow Rhode Island. And all of that information is available on the state website, And generally, when I say the state website, it is the Secretary of State of that state that has those things spelled out. We also have, documents that can help you, just sort of help guide you. So you don't have, it's not like you're starting from scratch, doing this. The second thing you have to do is make sure you have a well-documented set of organization bylaws and articles of organization. What is an article of organization? Bylaw, articles of organization, they're the same thing, but it's basically spelling out how the particular nonprofit is going to operate and what the board of directors are going to do. I'll talk some more about the board of directors shortly. How they are going to manage the nonprofit. If you remember, I said in an earlier slide, there's no one owner, but the legal responsibility of the nonprofit is determined by what's in the articles and the bylaws of the organization. Again, you don't have to worry about trying to think of this, in an abstract on a white paper. We do have templates to help you formulate your bylaws. The third point you must remember is whoever gets the salaries, highly compensated employees or officers of the nonprofit, their salaries have to be publicly reported. And how does it get publicly reported? It gets reported in the tax filing that you do with the federal government. Now, I say you're not paying any taxes, but the form that the IRS requires you to file, we call it a nonprofit organization's tax form, even though there are no taxes as such. Okay, and whatever you file with the IRS, that gets released by the IRS into the general media. And if you ever wanted to look at what these documents look like, the filing return is called a 990, and there is a national database put out by an organization called GuideStar. So if you just Google GuideStar, you'll be able to see it. And you can either be a nonprofit who has a membership there, or just you as an individual. You can go into the GuideStar website, and certain amounts of bits of data and information and reports are available on GuideStar. And all you do is write down what you want to look for, and you'll be able to get the financials of the nonprofit by looking at the 990. And every year, just like you as an individual or you as a for-profit entity file your tax returns, nonprofits file this 990. And that's in that 990, you would find all the salaries of the officers and the highly compensated employees of that nonprofit. So that's a must that's required by law. And the fourth one, probably I could not emphasize this more. You have to make sure, even if say you are the creator of the nonprofit, you have to have a competent board of directors. The board of directors is legally and fiscally responsible for this nonprofit. They provide the governance and oversight for the operations of the nonprofit. And anyone who is on the board of directors can have no financial incentives. Everything is pro bono. All the work they do is pro bono. So I'll stop here. And any questions on this slide?
Yeah, I did get a question about, because you had mentioned a nonprofit can be an LLC. Can you clarify that one, what that means?
Sure.
How is a nonprofit also, yeah.
So basically a nonprofit, and this is, I'm talking about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm not sure I know all of the details about how Rhode Island works, but I'm sure Rhode Island does many things almost identically to Massachusetts. So when you form a nonprofit, there are two things you will do. First is, if you want to raise public funds, you would get give the ability to people who donate the ability to deduct what they donate as a charitable deduction. And you do that with the IRS. And the IRS will then, based on what you file, will give you a 501c3 status. And you'll have a 501c3 number. And that is what you'll give any of your people any of your donors, you'll give them that. And then when they file their taxes, they'll take what they donate to you, any grant or anything, they will deduct that. Now, when you file for a 501c3, you have to have an official organization registered within your state. And in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, when you register with the Secretary of State, you can register as a nonprofit, and the legal status of the nonprofit would be an LLC. And by that, I mean, you're not paying any taxes or anything, but that's the structure of the nonprofit that you're registering. It's not a sole proprietorship. It's not some of these other categories apply to for-profit, like, Chapter C and this and that. Those things don't matter to you. So that's what I meant. Sorry, I told you a little bit more, but that's what you would do in Massachusetts.
And Ramesh, just to clarify, so staff can receive income, but the board of directors cannot.
So yes, so all correct. So all employees, like for example, the executive branch of a nonprofit, the person who heads it up is either called the president of the nonprofit or an executive director. They can all get salaries, which is approved by the board. Now, when somebody starts a small nonprofit, initially it's small. The founder, for example, could be the chair of the board of directors, but could also be the executive director or the president. And if that's the case, that individual could, in the role of the executive director or the president, get compensation, but as the chairperson of the board, cannot get any compensation as the chairperson. But there is one little caveat, because you have to be very transparent. The bylaws of the nonprofit should actually spell out exactly this point, that and bylaws can be changed after a nonprofit has been in existence. They can change bylaws anytime, but it should start out by saying the position of the president or the executive director is being what's the exact word, use the proper word, but is being filled by our board chair, and in the role of the executive director, this position will be compensated um, XYZ as approved by the board of directors. So for example, if let's say that person is on the board of directors, no other board member gets any compensation, but the executive director gets it, but that has to be public, has to be voted on at a board meeting. And that becomes part of the public record. And the board has to vote on that. If you get that compensation every year, they have to vote on that each time. And unless there is a majority vote, um, that board member who is the executive director, may not get the compensation.
Okay, I actually have two more questions. Can I live in one state and start a nonprofit in another?
Yes.
Okay. How many people need to be on your board?
Next slide, I'll get to that answer.
You'll get to that. Okay, here's the last one.
Yeah.
Question about the board. I'm a musician composer doing work in the community. Another artist was going to be on the board, but I think I'm understanding that might need to be a staff position. I guess we might need a little bit more to answer that, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could have two people on the board with similar skills and competencies. There doesn't have to be a staff person.
Then I think we've got more questions about the board. So let's I guess move forward and then come back to these questions if there's, yeah.
Okay. So the key roles that you have to remember when you're forming a nonprofit, you have to have a board of directors, executive management. You don't have to start off by having an executive management, but the key position in executive management is the executive director or the CEO. As I said, when you start off, the person who is founding the nonprofit, the chair, could also be the CEO. And then there is staff. And the staff is compensated just like any job. And there are 4 or 5 major areas of operations. One is information technology. The second is marketing. I say marketing and sales, but marketing basically fundraising, very, very important, and finance, very important. So a founder, as I said before, could be a board member and the executive director, but there have to be proper financial safeguards. So how many people on the board of directors? There are 3. All the laws always talk of minimum of 3 positions. One is a chair. The chair, so while the whole board is responsible fiscally, and legally, the chair is the one driving everything. The treasurer works to make sure that is responsible for the numbers, the expenses, and the revenue, stays on top of it. And of course, if there's a finance staff, which there eventually will be, the treasurer stays on top of that. And the third is they're either called secretary or clerk of the board. That position is responsible for making sure that all the board minutes are properly kept and the board minutes are voted on. The bylaws are in order. All of the filing is done correctly. But if you have only these 3, that's not enough. I generally tell people that when you form a nonprofit, have at least 5 positions filled. So when you initially form the bylaws, you have to make sure the bylaws allow for an odd number of board positions. So people have nonprofits with 7 members in their bylaws, or 9 members, or 11 members, but you don't have to fill all those positions all at once. You could have unfilled positions because as the nonprofit gets more involved and effective, you'll fill some of those positions. The reason you need an odd number, because you have to make sure your bylaws spell out the quorum. You would need at least 2/3 or depending on certain bylaws, you might say you might want to have 80% voting in favor of the bylaw or a motion for the motion to carry. If you have even number, then there could be ties and things could get messy. So you have an odd number. But when you start off, so let's say you form a nonprofit and your bylaws say you have 9 members, but you start off initially by just filling 5 out of those 9. And what are those 5? The chair, the treasurer, the secretary, and 2 more. What are the 2 more? You should have one person who is really good at fundraising and can understand and buys into the mission. Of course, you have to make sure everybody in the board of directors buys into the mission and goals of the nonprofit, but somebody who is good at getting money, either writing grants or getting people with grants. And the 5th one should be someone who is very involved in the community and who cares about the mission, besides just the chair or anything like that. So I think there is enough of a role that you have these 5 people. So as you can see, the complexity that comes in, if you started a for-profit, you just a person who forms a company and then you hire people and you're the boss and you give everybody direction and they do their jobs. But in a nonprofit, the entire board is the boss, and they all have a function that they play, and they do this all pro bono. It's very important to know that you have somebody you can, as the chair, you can count on, who can keep an eye on the money. Um, Many nonprofits fail because somebody absconds with the money, and usually it's somebody who is on the board. It could well be the person who founded it, or it could be somebody who is not a, you know, not an honest treasurer. Uh, but if you have a 5-member board who each one who knows what they have to do and they do that job pro bono, then you have a good number of people to get started and get going. In a small nonprofit, everybody has to pitch in and do the work, even if there is a staff. So any questions on the key roles on a nonprofit?
Yeah, if the board of directors and the executive director are the same person, do you need 3 additional board members to vote on the chair's, or I'm sorry, the executive director's compensation?
You need the whole board, so not just 3, you need everybody. So, and the board of the chair also has a vote because they are members of the board. Obviously, for the compensation of the ED position jointly held by the chair will vote yes, but the other members of the board need to also vote on it. You need to have a majority to vote on for any motion to pass.
This one says, what if 2 people start the nonprofit? Who gets paid?
What are the roles that when they're starting the nonprofit, what are the roles that these people are playing?
Okay, so we'll have to get a little bit more information on that for that question. If you could submit some more information, or perhaps this is a good conversation to schedule with a one-on-one meeting with a mentor.
Yeah, that probably is.
Yeah.
And to get the nonprofit started, let me just say this. The very first step you should take is identify who would be on your board of directors. So let's say you're going to have 5 members. You should be absolutely clear who are these 5 people who support the cause and will want to be on the board. I find there are people who have a great idea for a nonprofit, and obviously they talk to their friends or people who are involved in the same space, and people say, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, sure, I support this. And then they are not open to doing any work. I always tell people, make sure you get some sort of a firm commitment. And I have a cute little way of telling you how you could select your board of directors. Anybody who wants to be on a board of a nonprofit, they must meet 2 of the 3 W's that are needed for a board member. What are the 3 W's? The 3 W's are work, wisdom, and wealth. And they should have at least 2 out of these 3 W's. Work, meaning they're ready to roll up their sleeves and work for the cause of the nonprofit. Wealth is they're either willing and able and will help fund the nonprofit. And maybe they may not be able to fund a lot of money, but they must have, if they have a good network and they can talk to other people who will make the donation, that's the wealth part of it. And the third is wisdom. And the wisdom is very important. Wisdom in the area of the operations of the nonprofit and what what's needed to be done. So if you identify somebody who has 1 out of those 3, I would just say, yeah, be nice, be friendly with them. They could still be a funder, but don't jump to put them on your board. Teresa, can I go on? What do you think?
Yeah, go ahead. Go to the next.
Okay, so probably the most important thing is money. You have to make sure you generate enough revenues to cover all the costs required to meet the mission and stay in business. The points I'm making on this slide, they may be self-evident, but it's better to keep it in mind. The second point is, so a nonprofit exists and it provides human services. And the services provided by a nonprofit, legally, we have some terminology, like everything else, we have jargon in our lives for everything. So we have a nonprofit can either do fundraising and get money through funds and grants, and then they can get revenues from services. It doesn't, a nonprofit doesn't have to do all of the services free of charge, but what they charge the users of the services is generally at cost. So they will not be charging more than that, which is probably a lot less than that same service that could be available from a for-profit. Of course, there could be services that a nonprofit offers its community at no cost, at 0 cost. So what happens is the revenues that come from services from a nonprofit don't cover all the costs of the nonprofit. And you need to recognize that, which is why the third point is fundraising from donors and grants is essential, is absolutely essential. The fourth point is the more you can do to get repeat donations year after year, or a grant that is a multi-year grant, those are just perfect. Those are very important, and you should try to get those for your nonprofit. And then the last point is, obviously, people who are donating money, they need to know that the money is going to good use. So you have to be prepared to do a good explanation of the results and outcomes on a timely basis, not only just publicly, but on your website and also on communications to your donors, so that they feel that they are really helping a good cause. Any questions on when it comes to funding?
I don't think we have any at this time.
Okay, just so that, Teresa, I think maybe folks should know that we have a very dedicated webinar by one of our mentors, who is a colleague of mine. He has a very strong background in grants and fundraising, and I think that webinar is coming up later this month. Or you can just look on our website and you'll be able to see that. Okay, let me go on to the next item. and that is competition and collaboration. You definitely should do your homework and be aware of who else is in the space you operate. And in the space, I mean physically in the region where you're operating, in the state, or like say in New England. Uh, that's one space. The other is in the industry. So if you are interested in a nonprofit in education and music and healthcare, in community services, just be aware um, of who is there. And the reason you want to be aware is because you're new to this game, and some of these people may have been in the space much longer. Uh, so you should learn from them and see what you can do better. As a matter of fact, you could even volunteer with them and find out how they work and they operate. And it's important to know that. The third point is there are lots and lots of nonprofits. You know, Massachusetts is a very small state, but there are over 8,000 nonprofits just in Massachusetts alone. And you know, of course, in different sectors of the economy. Um, so, you know, you may be, you know, reinventing the wheel, and that's fine. Everybody who serves the community from a nonprofit, you know, there's always need for more people to provide services. But if there is another one who's in the same space, see if they're willing to, or they might be in a play in another space which is adjacent to yours. And I mean, there's some synergy. So you're offering, let's say, I'm making this up. Let's say you're offering some mental health services you want to offer, and you want to offer mental health services through the use of music, whereas somebody else is offering mental health services through the space of writing or art. Maybe you could collaborate and cooperate, and you know, your audience may be the same, your client may be the same, but you're using different techniques to help them. You know, so find out and explore the synergies between organizations, because at the end of the day, your clients are really going to benefit by what you're going to do and what another nonprofit may be doing. So essentially, this is my last slide. Um, it's very important to do an inventory of your strengths and gaps. The first, as you do this inventory, this is like a self-assessment that you do. And if it's two of you who are trying to form a nonprofit, or three of you, you should do a self-assessment of the two or three of you together. The first question is, do your circumstances, life intervenes in anything you do your circumstances allow you to spend the time and energy to stick with the nonprofit until it becomes an established nonprofit in the area? So are you able to devote time for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years till it's capable of running on its own with an executive and an operations staff? The second thing is, what are you good at? So out of that wealth, wisdom, and work, what are the elements of the actual operations are you good at? And who else do you know who would be interested and be actively involved in the same cause? Again, for the point of view of a board of directors, but also they could expand. You have two people who are good at providing the same kind of help for the nonprofit. The third question is probably the most important. What are you not good at? And be as honest as you can, because whatever you're not good at or your board of directors not good at, you are going to have to figure out how you will recruit resources and skills to provide those services and those talents. So it's very important to take an inventory of that. The next one has to do with fundraising. It's pretty obvious. How will you find people and funding resources to meet the mission and also to help you do what you're not good at. The next question applies to anybody who's trying to be an owner and a founder. You will be, after a point, be, will not be able to do everything yourself, even though you say, okay, I'll jump in and do it. But in the long haul, probably the role that will matter most is being a coach and knowing how well you can motivate and lead a team, motivate the board of directors, motivate the key staff, and lead them. And are you capable of doing that? Have you ever performed that kind of a role anywhere in your life, or in your business world, or in the nonprofit you're involved with? And the last question is kind of a tricky question because you have to be willing to delegate and as you expand, and you have to be willing to accept that whoever you delegate things to, they might land up making mistakes, and you have to be willing to trust them, and mistakes will happen, and what you need to do is step in and train and help them, and and figure out how you can get over the mistake. So you have to be willing to trust the judgment of other people who are involved in the nonprofit. My last slide after this is just a mechanical thing, and before I get to that, let me pause and see if there are any questions, any more questions.
Yes, can a nonprofit create and own a C corp?
Can a nonprofit own and operate a C corp? Let me probably flip it the other way. There are many successful for-profit companies, whether they are C corps or S corps, and after a while they make so much money they want to form a foundation or a nonprofit. So like all the large technology companies, they have a foundation or they have a nonprofit. There's more the other way around, but not the way that you just stated.
Can you organize a fundraising event ahead of starting a nonprofit?
Of course, but how will you get people to open their purses unless they have an understanding? I mean, you could do a nice pitch and tell them that you want funding to get this going. Now, one small detail thing, which again, when you sit down with a SCORE mentor, we can tell you, before you get your 501c3 status, which allows you to collect tax deductible donations, you don't have to wait for that. The IRS takes almost a whole year sometimes to give you that status after you file for it. But what you can do is you can get, there is a role called a fiscal agent. You can get another nonprofit, which is already established in the area, to be a fiscal sponsor. So let's say you have an event, like this person just asked to do fundraising. They can make a donation for your nonprofit work to this fiscal sponsor. But then you have to make sure that the fiscal sponsor buys into providing you with that service. So they'll keep the books and they'll get the funding, and they'll get all the funds that come to them. And they will probably charge a small fee for doing that work. But that's the way you can get started to get funding, even before you get your nonprofit status established.
Because to clarify, in relation to that question, if she does the event before she has that 501c3, then any money she collects would not be tax deductible for those people, correct?
They would not be tax deductible, and it'll look like she is collecting them for herself. So it's important to collect it under the name and the 501c3 status of a fiscal sponsor.
Can a board member be a relative?
Yes.
I was told we can apply as a nonprofit in progress, not needing a fiscal sponsor.
I don't know about that. Because
Yeah.
when you collect any money, you have to make sure you have a bank account under an EIN number, and the name and the account in the bank will be that of the nonprofit. So when you do that, if you don't have a 501(c)(3), that EIN number is essentially for a for-profit. So this thing about for a nonprofit in progress, I don't know what that means officially. One other thing besides the board of directors and all that, you should always make sure when you actually get going, make sure you have a good accountant, or if you have somebody who's a treasurer on your board who has got a, financial background and can do accounting for nonprofit to get going. The other is you have to have good legal counsel. Many legal lawyers and law firms will offer pro bono legal advice and support you, but some questions like this, you should make sure you have somebody, regardless of what a friend tells you or a score counselor, the finance and legal part of it, you should make sure you get it officially from somebody in that particular professional role.
Okay. This person's clarifying their nonprofit in progress. What they meant is that they are registered in Massachusetts and the IRS is in progress. So they're waiting for that, how it takes a while for that number to come back. So they're wondering if they can go ahead and start collecting money without that fiscal sponsor, even though the IRS hasn't fully approved them yet.
So they won't be able to collect it even though they are registered with the state, they won't be able, they don't have a 501(c)(3). So anybody who gives them the money, it's not going to be a deductible as a donation by the donor. And so they should get a fiscal sponsor if they want to start collecting the money.
So if you apply for a nonprofit, do you get the EIN right away, or do you need to wait for that 501 designation?
There are two separate things. You get an EIN right away. It's like online within 24, 48 hours. Anybody who applies to establish a business, you get the EIN right away. But the 501(c)(3) requires filing with filling out, it's a pretty long form, and then you have to give a forecast of what are the sources of the revenues as well as the costs, etc. And they take quite a while to give you. It could take up to a year. That is, if the IRS's particular office is not bombed with work, and the IRS seems to be constantly bombed with work.
So do I file as a nonprofit first or an LLC and then convert?
You mean with the state?
I'm not sure.
No,
So,
you don't do any conversions. I mean, this is the kind of question that one can answer. I can also answer one-on-one and even go online with that person onto the Secretary of State's website, and they can fill out the form themselves online, and they'll understand what I mean. It asks you what kind of a corporation it is, and you would check off a nonprofit.
and this other one, the different type, how do you know which one you are? Yeah, so if you want to get into specifics for your situation, really definitely Score Mentor. It is free. There's nothing you need to have done ahead of time. All you need is to have questions. So, set up an appointment, and they can go through what your situation is, what you've got going on, where you're at in the process, and answer specifically to you. It really is the better way. So if you have, if we get, so that we can really delve into your questions a little bit more. So I really strongly encourage you to consider doing that. Again, you can go through the score.org website, or you can email me. I did put that in there earlier, and we can help you with that. So yeah, score.org/Boston, or just the score.org. Either way, you can put your zip code in, and that'll match you to the Boston chapter or another chapter that's nearest you. You can also just email me directly. I had put it in chat, but it's outreach@scoreboston.org, and I can send you what time frames are available to meet with one of our mentors, and we can get those questions answered. So, all right. I think that takes us to the end. Thank you, Ramesh. You gave a lot of really fantastic information. I know everyone gained a lot from it. And thank you all for attending the meetings, virtual or in person. Most of them are virtual. I cannot think currently off the top of my head that there are any of our nonprofit mentors that are doing in person. Most of them are virtual. But I can look at that schedule if you must have in person. There are less options for that though. So, okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.